And why this needs to be, well, it's important for test construction or survey construction to make sure that we're asking about all the relevant sort of aspects of the topic. But there might be situations where we can't use predictive validity. You know, an obvious example might be if there's a course on campus that people are, let's say, let's say there's a forest measurements course, and we'd have some sort of final exam in the course that's supposed to test people's knowledge about all these different areas of forest measurement that we learned throughout the semester. Maybe a few of those students are going to go on into careers in forestry, but not everyone in that course is going to go on to a career in forestry. So we couldn't say, well, did grades in that course predict how good of foresters people are? Because we lost, you know, let's say we lost 80% of the people who took the exam on the course. So we couldn't correlate those scores with how good of foresters people are. So we could look at content validity and say that, okay, there's agreement that if someone is going to get an A in this forest measurements course, they need to know something about, you know, sampling and this and that and that. So if we're adequately sampling from that pool of content, we would say that, okay, we're the people that are getting an A, that they demonstrate competence in this area. Construct validity is probably the more difficult aspect of this to get or to understand. In this relates to this issue of, is there evidence that we've measured the construct? And so this becomes pretty, that willingness to pay discussion that we had earlier. A lot of times, you know, we're not requiring people to pay this money, so it's obviously sort of existing in the abstract realm. And so how can we get evidence that we've measured this construct that people are willing to pay? So one thing that we can do is specify how our construct should relate to other constructs, and then test those relationships. And I'm going to go back to this example here, and that she got passed out with the motivation for recreation. And so those were called the recreation experience preference scales. And so there's all these different scales, different constructs that have the numbered, that are numbered with the questions that go along with them. Some of them are grouped into domains with the capital letters, and then others aren't grouped together. And so, you know, the theory is that some of these are going to group themselves together, and then some shouldn't be as strongly related to each other. And so we have the questions that we use to measure these scales, and then sort of how the scales relate to each other. So the researchers that developed this, you know, in order to test the construct validity of it, they can test the extent that the scales were related to each other. They can test the relationship with other similar constructs, and also sort of look at the theory associated with this construct of recreation motivation. The theory being that people should rate these differently, and that should predict sort of where they're engaging in recreation and how they're engaging in recreation. So if we can start to piece together all these different tests, it goes to provide evidence that we're probably measuring what we think we're measuring. So for example, these colors didn't show up the best, but to get away from the usual demands of life and to avoid everyday responsibilities, for a while. And those questions relate to escaping rollover loads, and that would belong to this domain of escaping personal and social pressures. And that's on in the back or the bottom left. So on the column on the left, at the bottom is escape personal social pressures and then escape rollover loads. So those two questions, measure escaping rollover loads. To test your skills and abilities and to learn what you're capable of, those are supposed to measure competence testing, which is on the front, and that's supposed to belong to this domain of achievement and stimulation. To think about your personal values and think about who you are. That's supposed to measure introspection, which belongs to this domain of introspection. And then finally, those last two, to do something with your family, to bring your family closer together, those belong to the scale and domain of family togetherness. So each of those two questions are supposed to measure a construct that shouldn't be strongly related. And so techniques such as factor analysis can be used. Factor analysis would sort of create these linear combinations I explained in variance in the data. And we would hope that what we would see is that, our theory is that the two questions in each of those boxes should relate to each other, but not be strongly related to the other variables in the data, in our test. So if we would see a pattern like this, where the strong relationship being denoted in red, and then there's a weak relationship in that, like, well, it's supposed to be yellow, like yellow color, that would be evidence of construct validity, because it's consistent with what we hypothesized.